Well, it's October 2019, and that's nearly 1 whole year since Battlefield 5 released. Now, it's actually 11 months, but the reason I've decided to do this video now is because I wouldn't really be surprised if the Pacific fell on the actual anniversary of when Battlefield 5 had been released. And I kind of wanted to talk about Battlefield 5 so far, this whole year, where things are at, and personally where the franchise is at. I think there are a lot of big questions that need to be talked about, and a lot of things that need to be discussed about the franchise in terms of where it's at. So today, in this video, I'm going to be diving into the state of Battlefield 5, and also the state of Battlefield as a franchise, now that it's been a whole year since this new game has released. If you would summarize Battlefield 5 in one word, it would just be poor. At the moment, there's really no way around it. Sure, the new map that was Metro Remake was nice. Sure, Al Sindan finally coming out is a positive thing. But ultimately, we're looking at what? You know, a handful of maps, none of which I would say particularly or anything particularly special. I think Mercury was probably one of the best maps we got out of that. The Metro Remaster is fantastic, but again, it's not exactly new, so to speak. It is a remake after all. But really, there's just been nothing. There has been no standout thing where I can point and go, yep, this was the thing that made Battlefield 5 really interesting. And there's not even things in terms of development that I can point to. Like, you know, with some games you can point to how well they've fought back against some bugs and stuff, like Rainbow Six. But with Battlefield, you just can't. There are still so many in the game. Now, that's not to discredit the last month or two, because the last month or two, things have actually been going in a really positive direction. We've had some great content releases, some really good bug fixes, but it all just feels too little too late. And I know it sounds strange, but Battlefield 5 in a lot of ways, to me, already feels dated. Just going around and playing some new games and playing some things like Call of Duty Modern Warfare and just some general other stuff on Steam, I've really come to notice that the game just doesn't feel great. It doesn't have that kind of shine and passion to it that I think make a lot of shooters impressive. If I were to look around the field right now, I'd say Modern Warfare is definitely up there for that. But games like Apex Legends, I think Apex is a fantastic example of a game that really understands fluidity, making a gun feel great, making, you know, your environment feel interactive. And I appreciate that that is a battle royale, but, you know, even just in terms of shooting mechanics, I feel like it does things relatively well. And really, I just find the Battlefield for me feels very mediocre right now. It doesn't feel like it's special at anything. It feels like it's kind of the master of none. And as much as I like the gunplay, and as much as I think the gunplay of Battlefield 5 has always been a huge asset, I think it's just offset by so many issues at the moment, including things like performance, where it's just it's such a letdown to play. You know, if you go back and play Battlefield 4 and 3, you know, you really have these standout moments, be it a certain DLC like Close Quarters or Aftermath that really blow your mind, or even just in Battlefield 4, you know, some of the stuff towards the end of the game in terms of like the amount of content that was in the game, in terms of just how much there really was to play with in that sandbox environment, I found personally to be really impressive. But here we are at the moment in Battlefield, and, you know, we have no new news on RSP and private games. It does appear to be like it's going to be a wait for that. We have a relatively bugged game. It's got some stuff going well for it at the moment, but it's just not running particularly well. I'd argue that the handling and just how the game feels as well isn't very with the times. Like, it feels kind of sluggish in a lot of places, especially if you compare it to something like Battlefield 4 and 3, but maybe that's just the performance side of things kicking in. Really, all in all, I think I'd have to say that the game for me just doesn't represent anything special right now. And maybe that's just me being too picky, maybe that's just me being quite pessimistic about the current state of affairs, but I just really feel as though if you look at Battlefield 5 right now, there is no way you could say I'd recommend this to a friend. It has been a disappointment, and I think the fact that we're 11 months into a life cycle and are only now just maybe starting to see some glimmers of hope really goes to show how disappointing this has been. You know, even with some of the other Battlefield games that have been played with issues like 4 and 3, it was usually a couple of months, 3 to 6 months, I'd say, at best, before things started to look great again. And, you know, it's just, it's a disappointment, and there's no two ways about it. I do think things will get better. I do think the Pacific's going to be a great start with that. But ultimately, I just think the Battlefield 5, for me, feels like a swing and a miss for the franchise. Now, speaking of the franchise, well, what is the plan for Battlefield, and where are we at now? Now, I personally feel as though Battlefield 1 wasn't a great game. That is my personal opinion. I think it departed a lot from what made the franchise great. I think it departed in terms of map design. I think it only had a few that really worked. It felt sloppy in some gameplay elements. That was the reason I didn't really enjoy that game, and in fact I am planning on revisiting it very soon, so if you're interested in my renewed thoughts on Battlefield 1, make sure you hit that subscribe button. But really, I didn't really enjoy Battlefield 1, and then to have Battlefield 5 come out and be a disappointment was a huge issue for me. Now, Battlefield 1 at the very least was a commercial success. It did a fantastic job in that department and attracted a whole new community of players to the game, which is always a positive thing. But for Battlefield 5 to just get things so drastically wrong from the get-go, and then kind of just be so generically disappointing throughout the year, I really do feel as though the franchise is in a bad way. You know, not an unsalvageable state, not, you know, the point of no return, but I think it's in a bad way. I think there's a lot of shot confidence, and then you can see it. Whenever DICE announce anything or say they're going to do anything, the instant reaction from most of the community is, yeah, sure. Like, they don't care about dates anymore because they're just not listening, because they don't want to, because none of them want to get their hopes up to have them shot in the space of a month or two. And I really understand that, and I sympathize with that, just because I think a lot of us expected this game to do better, especially considering when you listen to the announcements and you listen to how the game originally panned out with all these great things like a Battle Royale mode and a fully fledged multiplayer World War II shooter with customization options. We really thought it could have head in a really good direction, but it's clear that, be it Frostbite, some other issues, or just bugs in between, that simply wasn't the case this time. And I feel as though Battlefield 5 is probably represented the lowest point in the franchise since Battlefield 4's buggy stage, in my opinion. Well, so what's next? You know, it's all well and good saying that the past year or so has been a bit of a shit show, but what is going to be next? And, well, we start with the Pacific. I think the Pacific may very well be this huge opportunity to kind of do a soft reboot for Battlefield 5, you know, really get a lot of the major bugs ironed out and say, look guys, here's the Pacific, it's this mad bastard DLC with a couple of vehicles, a couple of new weapons, brand new maps, brand new factions, you know, eat your heart out and have a great time. I really hope that does come to pass, but I don't think it's necessarily going to restore faith in Battlefield 5. I think it will restore faith in DICE a little bit and restore faith in the franchise a little bit to show that they can produce things that people find interesting and people enjoy. And I don't really doubt that, full stop, but I do believe in the past couple of months we've seen a huge disconnect between what's been happening at the studio and what the community actually wants to see from the game. The kind of stuff that the guys over at Battlefront, for example, with the DICE studios, have really got nailed down to a T. They've really got their ear to the ground there. And I don't doubt the community team for that in terms of Battlefield 5. I really do feel as though the community managers and stuff say, hey, here are these things that, you know, we think are here and people want, and the studio sort of goes, yeah, but we're working on X, Y, and Z, and this is broken, and here's why A, B, and C can't be a thing. And I've kind of gathered that from some of the feedback sessions I've had with the developers. Just, you know, there's this kind of been a sense, especially at Gamescom, I really do feel as though they wanted the game to be in a better state, but there was just so many things that they were juggling that made that not be the case. And of course, that's just an outside-in interpretation. I remember speaking to Ryan, one of the heads at DICE at the moment, and I was saying, like, you know, why isn't it as simple as flipping a switch with feedback? You know, why isn't it, you know, just as easy as you know, if we want to rebalance a weapon, we can just press a button and it goes live on the servers, and then if it doesn't work, we just press another button and it turns off. And because it seemed as though with this whole new updated cadence for Battlefield 5 that was going to be the plan. And the answer really just was that they just couldn't do it. It just wasn't a thing at the moment in their capability. I do believe it is in their capability, and I think they will have it in that kind of area at some point. But I really do feel as though this live service has been one of the largest growing pains for DICE and perhaps EA as well. I really don't know whether EA anticipated just how much money and backing would have to go into a live service like this to make the game successful. And I think it shows, because I imagine that financially Battlefield 5 has been quite disappointing for them. But it wouldn't have been had there been a fully fledged live service, because people would have bought the game. And more people would have bought the game beyond those that originally picked it up. But in terms of what's next, after this entire sort of Pacific DLC, there's going to be another gap. I do not doubt that at all. There's going to be a gap where it's just like, there's not a lot going on right now. And I'll be honest with you, I hope they just release a new one next year. If they have been working on one behind closed doors, which I get the impression has been the case, just seeing that a lot of the developers that I follow are suddenly working on projects that seemingly don't have a name or don't exist. Quite a few of them, in fact, you know, and a few times I've been to the sort of DICE offices, just asking people what they're up to these days. They immediately go, I'm working on a thing. And I guess that's sort of the generic code word for, I'm probably working on the next game, but you know I can't tell you that. So I really do feel as though hopefully another game is coming for 2020, purely because I'd be very surprised if EA and DICE were willing to miss a brand new console generation launch. I don't think that's something they're willing to do. You know, we're talking about a game which so regularly has decided to compete with the likes of Call of Duty. Whether or not you think that's a good thing for the franchise is an entirely different conversation. But just in terms of sales, they've always been on the forefront of brand new releases. And I expect to see that again next year. But I just want to see a flashback to the modern, go back to what made Battlefield special. You know, we really want to see, you know, the modern genre of Battlefield where things are impressive again. You know, Battlefield has always been kind of a forefront of innovation for what can be possible in a first-person shooter, and in terms of creating an environment where people are just having a shit ton of fun. And I'd really like to see them go back to that, whether it's, you know, whether they want to be the prettiest Battlefield or prettiest first-person shooter alive, or, you know, they want to introduce something like dynamic weather, or they want to introduce something like dynamic lighting, just anything possible, really. I really do believe, in terms of the studio, that DICE is a fantastic place that can produce fantastic experiences. I just think we need to see it in the next game and not see a prototype in progress. But anywho, folks, that's it from me, TheTacticalBrit. Please let me know what you guys are thinking in the comment section below. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you again soon in another video.